I love the giggles. Okay, that should bring up a little, there we go. Bummer. All right, are we recording? I believe we are.
Yes, you are, Maria. Yeah.
Having missed that whole introduction, can I welcome, and please feel free to leave your questions to the end. Does anyone have any concerns or objections? Is everyone happy for us to continue recording into the question and answer segment? Everyone's fine with that? All right. Intend to make the recording, all goes well, available via the Stargardt or the Order of Stargardians Facebook page. And after the question and answer section, of course, we will excuse the ladies if they wish to rush off to their much more sociable connections for today, agenda today, the wedding. But we would love to invite you to stay and have a bit of a chat around your support group. So the Order of Stargardians has a little bit of an agenda, I believe, and I'd like to touch base with the Retinitis Pigmentosa group about where you guys are at and in developing your support group. So without further ado, can I hand over to Karen, please?
Okay, so can we have the lights dimmed again?
Yes.
And how do I bring up?
Oh yes, let me just change that for you.
Oh, that's better. Doesn't have to be too dark. Sorry guys, you've been plunged back into darkness.
How's everyone faring with this? Fine, we've got a fine. There's your presentation.
That's nice. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to see you all here today, and those that are at home, I'm extremely envious that you're sitting in your jammies drinking a cup of tea. Only Maria, my gorgeous friend Maria, could convince us to work on a Saturday morning. I do have PowerPoint slides, but that is more for my benefit. There is nothing that you will miss hearing that's just on slides. So I just want to make that clear, that it sort of gives me a focus and allows you to look at something other than me. Who we are. We're a group, we're a team, and we're composed of genetic counsellors like me and Marnie, and also clinical geneticists. Here's a nice, no point pointing at that, is there? A nice picture of Ben, probably I reckon 10 years ago, do you think, Marnie? Sorry, Ben. Ben does head up the ocular team with Marnie at Genetic Services, and has been really instrumental in actually opening this up in a way that it didn't exist before in the genetics world. I also have a little plug for myself. I work privately as well as at Genetic Services, and so I wear a couple of different hats. But what we do lots of things, and I'm talking broadly here. We cover reproductive genetic counselling, where we're doing preconception and pregnancy work. Paediatric is a section in itself for diagnosis of children suspected or known to have a genetic condition. Adult onset, but also adults coming in, again, for a diagnosis of genetic condition or a family history where they're wondering about what this means. We also have a separate section for familial cancer and cardiovascular disease. So what Marnie was saying earlier, or mentioned earlier, is that they're hoping that the genetic or the ocular area of genetics will also grow and be funded in such a way that it also becomes its own recognised area and can build from there. But most of it, what's in common for the areas is that it includes clinical and family history assessment and diagnosis, genetic testing if it's appropriate and available, guidance and referral and support. This is a very old slide of what we as genetic counselling is about, but it's about a communication process to help individuals, couples and families understand and adapt to the medical, the psychological, the familial and the reproductive implications of genetic conditions. And that's our code of ethics. So this is what we try to work to. And don't try to read this, but what it's actually saying is that our principles involve being non-directive and client-focused. And we're considering the individuals and families we see as a whole. Unlike the dentist that just looks at your teeth and doesn't worry about your broken leg, we do try to see you as a whole, your emotional response, your psychological responses, your medical and your genetic and familial aspects of a genetic condition. And confidentiality is very much part of what we do. We try to promote the understanding. Enable informed consent, really important when we start talking about genetic testing. Facilitate and help that decision-making process. It's not our decision, it's the individual and the family's decision that's very important. Try to reduce any psychological distress and anxiety, and we empower the individuals so that they have their own personal control. And sometimes in the medical arena, in the medical field, that sometimes feels that it gets lost. I'm not a medical person, doctor. And also try to adapt to the stressful, often stressful events as they're occurring. But just in brief, reproductive area, we talk about preconception planning. So we see many people that come in wanting to know about the reproductive chances of having a baby with a genetic condition or what's occurred in a family. Questions around what's the chance of it being inherited and what does it mean for them and their family, and is there any genetic testing to help clarify this? The area of children is more about the diagnosis, but what it means for them and for the future. Again, is it an inherited condition? And what are the chances of recurrence for the parents, but also that child when they grow up and have their own children? But also important is what are the treatments, clinical trials and management available for that child as that child grows. So this is a bit blurry, but don't worry, it's good to, what happens when you come to genetics? Basically, we sit down and we do take family histories. We want to know about Uncle Joe, Auntie Sally, how many children have you had? What about your grandparents? And important things that we also ask is, where did your ancestors come from? Most say Australia, but what we're actually asking is, what is your ethnic and ancestral background? Because that can help inform us as to genetic risk. Also, has there been any cousin marriages or anything in the family? Because this all adds into the picture of the genetic conditions we're looking at. We also talk at that stage also about any diagnosis that has been made, and also what the implications are for the individual and their family. Sometimes we're seeing people at a point in time where it's feeling very overwhelming, and we try to break it into steps that can slowly be adjusted to and help walk through that process of what's happening now, what's going to be happening next week and the years to come. Answering questions. Sometimes people are in a state of limbo, not knowing what this means, and having our appointments, unlike your local GP that's in 10 minutes in and out, our appointments are usually an hour to allow that process to happen, where we're guided by your questions, what are your concerns, and for many, receiving answers can provide a sense of relief, even when those answers aren't always what an individual or a family want to hear. Sometimes knowing gives some concrete information to move forward and allow access to resources, support, financial and treatment options and clinical trials. So genetic testing, when we start talking about genetic testing, we're often introducing a new language and about genetic diagnosis. And just to put it in context, Marnie, again, this is her area, when we're talking about inherited retinal disease, there's over 260 different genes. So it's not just a simple, this is a gene that causes this. And some of the questions is, why do we need a genetic test when we've got a clinical diagnosis, sometimes it helps to clarify inheritance. Sometimes it helps to clarify even the clinical diagnosis and provides some underlying understanding of what the cause is on a genetic level. And that helps to guide the disease management. Now, I'm not going to do this, but this is the sort of information we talk through at appointment. We give you a mini 101 about genetics, and that's not about trying to confuse you. It's just about providing some context for the discussion that we have. What are genes? What do they do? How do we understand them? What are chromosomes that carry all our genes? Because when we start talking about inheritance, it needs a context for you to understand. And going back to the family history that we take, we turn those little pretty pictures of faces into little squares and circles. And the squares are usually men, male, circles are female. We have, I go to point again, I'm very actually a pointing person. And we look at the patterns of inheritance that we're seeing, and sometimes it's not clear. With all of these conditions that Moni's going to talk about today, there's multiple different ways they can be inherited. So we can see that from a genetic level, but if we're looking at your family history, we're also seeing it from a pattern. And here, this is an example of when a condition is more likely recessive, meaning it's been inherited from two parents, from both parents that carry the condition. They do not have the condition, but they've passed it on, a gene on to the children who are then affected with the condition. But when we see this, and people will often come to us and say, but there's no family history because you can't see the gene that's being carried. I don't know if anyone remembers, but I remember this from my school days about Punnett squares, how we work out recessive inheritance. I still love them. It was my only way of making sense of it at that stage. Another form of inheritance that we look at is dominant, where we are seeing individuals in each generation affected with the condition. And then we start building a picture there that why does the last generation, there's nobody affected. But this helps inform us, as in X-linked, that is carried by the female and passed on and usually affects their sons. So in a family history, we would see usually, and not always, but usually males or men with the condition. So this is what informs us to help having that discussion with you before the genetic testing even. So if we're talking about the retinal diseases that we more commonly see, we're seeing the retinitis pigmentosa, Usher syndrome, Leber's and Stargardt's. These are a collection, and there's a very wide collection of some very rare and diverse eye conditions. And they all have variable inheritance. Even RP, over 100 different genes, about 30 to 40% are dominant, 50 to 60% are recessive in nature, and 15% X-linked. So even though on a clinical level we're talking about RP, on a genetic level they're being inherited and expressed in a different way. Usher syndrome is usually autosomal recessive, Leber's recessive and dominant, and Stargardt's recessive. So it can get quite confusing because you see one family that it's following a dominant, another family recessive, and you're sitting there going, I don't get this.
Wow.
And so again, going back to why do we do clinical and genetic diagnosis? About sometimes these presentations of conditions overlap and make the diagnosis difficult. Sometimes the variable inheritance patterns make it more confusing. So many genes involved. This is why genetic testing has not previously been very successful, because there was just way too many genetic underlying causes and not the technology to tease it out. However, the molecular or genetic testing complements the clinical diagnosis and trying to tease all these factors out. New testing has come on board that's now screening and able to identify the variants in hundreds of genes, and that wasn't available before. And suddenly, it feels like suddenly to me that all this genetic testing is happening now for ocular conditions that never was available. And when we're talking genetic testing, we're doing the analysis of an individual's DNA and then building from that to family. We're looking for little changes in genes that can lead to disease. We all have changes in our genes. We are all individual and all different. Some of those changes are benign, some we still don't know what they mean, but we're starting to understand better what are those disease-causing variants and what are the conditions associated with them. It helps us understand the inheritance pattern to help improve the management, help access latest treatments and provide study participation. And also gene therapy is becoming much more to the forefront of this area. Do not try to read this, but this is like the flow chart where you start at the top usually, but it doesn't always happen, where clinical evaluation can lead to a suspected diagnosis, to a retinal specialist, to a genetic specialist. Then the discussion about genetic testing happens, and it's optional. You can elect to not have testing, and that does not change your clinical management options. If you do elect to have genetic testing, we talk through what are the possibilities that we may find a disease-causing variant. We may find a variant that we still don't understand. What do you do with that? What do we do with it? Or that there's nothing being found. And what that means, does that mean negative is negative, but you've got the genetic condition? So we talk through all those aspects of what the possible outcomes are if you have genetic testing. I'm not going to go through those. Those are the possible outcomes, right from benign through to pathogenic. Our nightmare is the middle one, the uncertain ones. How do we explain that to you? But how do we make sense of it? I just want to touch on this because this is becoming very much, again, an option for individuals that have a diagnosis of a retinal disease. So there's access to clinical trials. There's sponsored testing now available. Genetic testing in the past was always through the public system if it was available. Then it became available privately, but very expensive. Now there's sponsored testings by companies that actually will pay for your genetic testing to help develop clinical trials, new research and treatments. There's some debate and discussion around sponsored testing, but it is available. No cost for the testing, and it's available both privately and now through the public health system.
Wow.
I'm not sure if I got sent a couple of slides from one of the reps involved in the sponsored testing. I think he gave these also to Fred Jim, but he was hoping to get them out there, that there is these websites that help provide resources and information about the sponsored testing and the treatments and research that they're doing. And these are, again, the website. They are educational for both the carers, the patients, and the health professionals involved in their management.
So that's let me just read out the address, Karen, the www.divert.
Do you want me to read it out?
If you don't mind, that would be lovely. Yeah.
www.discoverird.com.au. So if you put Discover IRD, you'll find it. It will pop up. And I had a look last night. And it's quite a nice website, and it is designed to be visually helpful So that's why they have different access portals by the look of it, because they're done in different colours, different fonts.
Thank you.
This also, I only became, Marnie, you may have seen this. This has been sent out, a new brochure, to all the ophthalmologists, providing them with information about the sponsored programs that's run through the genetic testing lab called Blueprint. And this is what Marnie's doing through genetic services, and also is becoming available privately for the private ophthalmologists as well. But it is the little brochures. She said, oh, if I'd known you were going to do this, I would have sent you lots and lots of them, but it was a bit late at short notice. But if you are interested, these were designed for the health professionals. They are going to do one for the individuals and families as well. But it is talking about the panels. There's a 322 gene panel. That's huge. The eligibility and the benefits.
Karen, perhaps we can help distribute that after the talk, if that's what people would like.
Yeah. And we can definitely get that information. They also sent me this, which I was quite surprised about, talking about the private route and the public route. Did you see this, Marnie? No. Amazing what we find out coming to speak to you today. But it is looking at the testing's about a 4 to 6 week turnaround time. It's a mouth swab. It's free. The actual testing, and to talk with your ophthalmologist for referral either into the genetics services or privately. And even there's just a tiny sort of snippet to say what's coming out in the literature. This was published in December last year, and it's a really good article on genetic testing and diagnosis of inherited retinal disease, but it is very much at the forefront of what's happening. And I think the work Marnie and Ben are doing is really amazing, and I hope that it can be helpful for the family and individuals. And that's all I've got to say. And I plunged you into darkness, and I now disappear.
Thank you. Absolutely. And there's a bottle of water up there for you. Karen, thank you. I think that was really informative. We'll take questions at the end, shall we? Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everyone.
Let me see if I can connect you.
Am I on the camera? Yeah, beg your pardon.
How's that? Can we see my face, Marnie? I think we can.
No. Why can't we see you? Hang on. Let me just ask everyone. We see Marnie. Can we see Marnie?
No.
Why can't we see you? I'm not seeing you. I'm getting black screen.
We can see her now.
I'm still not seeing you.
I can see Marnie now.
I'll turn me off. Let me see what's up there. Maybe if you want to play with these.
Maria.
I'll let you know if anything pops up.
It says the camera's on.
Yeah.
Maria, we can see you both now.
We're not seeing you on. Can I have some feedback from people online? Are we seeing Marnie's face?
Yes. Yes.
We are.
Okay. Yeah. I turned it off and on again.
Oh, sweet. Thank you. Yes.
The chat
Right.
says, hang on, I'm not seeing you from here though. Oh, someone said yes?
Yes.
Okay, we're getting yes from the chats.
Okay.
Excellent.
All right. So good morning, everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about the genetics of two specific ocular genetic conditions, Retinitis Pigmentosa, which I'll just call RP from now on for short, and Stargardt's disease. So I thought I'd start by just giving some basic genetic principles, which Karen kind of touched on, and is what we do in a genetics appointment when people come and see us to talk about these conditions, because it just gives people a little bit of background information and makes the more complicated things that we talk about later on a little bit easier to understand. And I'll talk about genetic testing, the results, the possible results, and what that might mean for the individual being tested, but also for their family and their future family. So if we go right back to the beginning, the body's made up of cells, and we all start life as one cell when the sperm meets the egg. And inside the middle of that cell is our DNA. So DNA is our body's instruction manual for how we'll grow and develop and function. So DNA is organised into thread-like structures called chromosomes, which you may have heard of. And most people have 46 chromosomes in every single cell of their body. All of the chromosomes come in pairs, so we get half from our mum and half from our dad. So 22 of those chromosome pairs are autosomes, which means that everybody has them, boys and girls, and the 23rd pair are our sex chromosomes. Boys have an X and a Y, and girls have 2 X's. So every single chromosome that we have has thousands of genes, and each gene codes for a specific instruction, which tells the body how to make a particular protein. And every one of these proteins has a specific job to do in our body, so we remain healthy and can function normally. For example, we currently know of more than 100 genes associated with retinitis pigmentosa, or RP. And all of these genes code for proteins that are involved in the structure and function of specialised light receptor cells in our retina. So they're called cones and rods. So rods help us with vision in low light, and cones help us with vision in bright light, and it includes our colour vision. So what can happen is sometimes people have spelling mistakes in their gene, which makes the instruction unclear and the protein not be able to be made properly. These spelling mistakes are often referred to as mutations in the gene or gene faults, and they're often inherited from our parents and passed down through generations of our family. It is also possible for these mutations to occur for the first time in that individual very soon after they were conceived. These are called de novo mutations, and in that scenario, the individual is the first person in the family to have it, but they can then pass it on to their children and their children and so on. So if someone has a mutation in a gene associated with RP and is therefore not making enough rods or cones in their retina, the progressive degeneration of these cells causes the characteristic pattern of vision loss that we see with RP. So if you have a clinical diagnosis of RP, it's possible to do a genetic test to clarify if you have a mutation in one of these genes. This is done by getting DNA from either a sample of your blood or your saliva, and searching through every single gene from beginning to end, looking for spelling mistakes. These spelling mistakes, the ones that we're looking for, are ones that make the instruction unreadable and the protein not be able to be made. If you think about every single gene that we have as an encyclopedia of information, the genetic test involves checking every sentence on every page for a mistake that makes the sentence unreadable. If a mutation is identified in a gene that we know is associated with RP, and that person has a clinical diagnosis of RP, then we can be quite confident that that's the cause of their condition. The particular gene in which the mutation is found can also tell us about how the gene fault is inherited and how it's passed down through families. So because there's so many genes that cause RP, there's lots of different ways that RP can be inherited or passed down through families. And often by having a genetic test and finding the cause, you can then identify how that gene will be passed down in that family. So I'm just going to touch on the different ways that the genes can be passed down. So the first one that Karen has mentioned was autosomal dominant. And this means that you only need to have, so when we were talking before about our chromosomes and how they come in pairs, autosomal dominant means you only have to have the mistake on one copy of that gene for you to have the condition. So people with gene faults in genes that are inherited in an autosomal dominant way have one copy of the gene that's working and has the normal instruction that can be read and the protein can be made, and then one copy that's faulty and not working properly. So it is possible, if we identify an autosomal dominant gene fault, it's possible that that person has inherited it from one of their parents, or it's possible that it's happened for the first time in that person. So often if we find one of these gene faults, we can then test parents to work out whether or not this is something that's historical in a family or whether it's happened for the first time in the person that we're testing. Autosomal recessive inheritance is the next type, and this occurs when we need to have two copies of the mutation, so the mistake or the spelling mistake on both copies of the gene to have the condition. And this usually occurs when we inherit one copy from each parent. So each parent is a healthy carrier of a gene fault. They only have the one mistake on one copy, so it's not affecting their health whatsoever. But if both parents pass on their faulty copy and the child inherits both of the mutations and therefore has a copy on both, then they're affected with the genetic condition. Okay, and the last type I wanted to talk about was X-linked inheritance. X-linked inheritance, which I've lost here. So there's a small percentage of RP genes that we know about that are caused by, that can cause X-linked inheritance. And this type of RP mutation is on the X chromosome. So therefore, gender has a role to play in whether or not someone is affected with that condition. So as males only have one copy of their X chromosome, so we talked about before how males have an X and a Y, and females have two X's. If the mutation or the gene fault is on the X, then the boys only have one X, so therefore their X isn't working, and usually they are more severely affected if you're looking at a family history. The women can carry the mutation because they have two copies of their X, so one of their X's is affected and their other X is working fine. And it is possible for women to have some mild features of the condition or develop them later in life, but we don't see them being affected as severely as males. And because it's on the X chromosome as well, it makes a difference to how it's passed on. So because men will pass on their Y chromosome to their sons, men who are affected with an X-linked type of RP, all of their boys will not be affected, but their girls will be carriers and can then pass the condition on to their children and down the line. So as we were saying before, the genetic testing does make a difference in terms of knowing how a condition is passed down through a family, and can give a lot of information not only to the individual having the test, but to their relatives, so siblings, children, future children. In particular, it can be very helpful if people are at the stage where they're planning a family, or if their children are planning a family, because they can then use that information to talk about what their reproductive risk is, what are the chances of them having a child affected with this condition, and what are their options for not passing on that gene change. So we often see people who have genetic conditions or who have had a genetic test and have been identified to have a change in a gene that's causing the genetic condition, and talk to them about their options for having children.
Marnie,
Yeah.
but we actually can't see you.
Oh.
So we're just going to make sure this video is turned on, and it looks like it is.
Yeah.
I can't resolve this, but we're really enjoying listening to you, but we actually can't see you.
Yeah.
I understand. Is that right, everyone? No one can actually see Marnie? Because I'm told
Oh.
it keeps flicking on and off. It's probably me turning it on and off. But we can hear your lovely voice.
Okay.
So
Online we can see her, it says there. Okay.
that's the most important thing anyway.
So we're talking about reproductive risks, and just briefly, if we talk about if we do a genetic test and we find a genetic cause for that person's RP, then there are a whole lot of options to test for that either before someone's pregnant or during pregnancy to determine if their child has the gene fault or has inherited the gene fault. Pre-pregnancy, the way to do that is via IVF. So you can go down the IVF pathway and create embryos that way, and then test the embryos for the known gene fault that's been identified, and only use the ones that don't have it. So you then know that if you reimplant an embryo and you become pregnant, that it's been tested and it doesn't have the gene fault that you have, so therefore the pregnancy is unaffected. So a big part of our role as a genetic counsellor is to sit down with people and talk about the nuts and bolts of that, because it sounds straightforward, but there's a lot of, I guess, that goes into it, and a lot of ups and downs and things that can go along with doing that type of testing. But it's definitely an option for people if they are found to have a gene fault that's causing their genetic eye condition. And then the other way to test for that is if you are already pregnant. You can do a genetic test at around the sort of 12-week mark, where they take a sample of DNA from the placenta and test that for the genetic condition. The difference with that is that if that baby is then found to have that gene fault, the only way to not have that baby that's affected is to stop the pregnancy at that point. So a big part of our role is talking through all of those options with people, the pros and cons, you know, the ethical issues, all that kind of stuff, and deciding whether or not, or which option's better for them, if any option is. So the genetic testing itself is not always straightforward. And yes, we can do these genetic tests now where we screen for hundreds and hundreds of genes that we know are associated with the condition, but we don't always get an answer. So a lot of the time we don't find anything. We don't find any changes in any of those genes, and that doesn't mean that you don't have the condition. It just means that our technology hasn't found it, or whatever's causing your condition isn't on a gene that's on the panel that we're testing for. So whenever we don't find anything, we call the result inconclusive. It's never negative. And it doesn't really change much in terms of the person's clinical management. It just means that there's less options for them in terms of testing their family members or using that in future pregnancy planning and reproductive risks. One of the other possibilities that Karen briefly mentioned is when we find changes in genes, but we're not quite sure what they mean. So the technology is really good and it's advanced very quickly. And what that means is we often find these spelling mistakes in genes that we don't exactly know what they mean. So they've never been reported before. They, you know, seem to fit with what's going on, but we just don't have enough evidence to say that this is the cause of that condition in that person. So they're called variants of unknown significance, and as Karen said, they give us the biggest headaches because I guess there's a lot of uncertainty around what that means for the individual, and there's nothing really they can do with that information. So we can't use a variant of uncertain significance to test relatives or to use in pregnancy planning, because what we don't want to do is test for something that isn't actually the cause of the condition and then use that to make decisions, and find out later that it's actually just a normal variant in a gene for that person and not related to the disease that they have. Yeah, it's very confusing, and I guess because there's so many different possibilities with RP, sometimes having a genetic test and clarifying what it is for you means that you can then just learn about that particular mode of inheritance and that particular gene and just focus on that rather than have to know about all the different options. So I think so the last thing I wanted to say in relation to RP was that sometimes the gene faults that are identified specifically relate to RP, and that's sort of the whole story. But there are also some gene faults, or some genes that we know about related to RP that are actually part of a wider genetic syndrome. So sometimes we can find a change in a gene that is associated with a genetic syndrome. So that might then mean that an individual is at risk of other systems in their body being affected by that gene fault. So not only the retina and the eyes, but there might be a risk of some other things associated, which is obviously very good information for the individual and their own health going forward, but also for family planning. And sometimes these syndromes can affect children in different ways to adults, and might make the picture of the disease and the progression of the disease a bit different depending on what gene the change has been found in. So if we move on to Stargardt's disease, a lot of the concepts or the things that I've talked about for RP apply for Stargardt's, but I'll try and clarify, I guess, the differences as well as the complexities in terms of the genetic testing for Stargardt's disease, because it is very tricky. And I'll talk about what we're currently doing at Genetic Services for this one as well. So Stargardt's disease, like RP, affects the retina. However, it specifically affects a small area in the centre of the retina called the macula. The macula is responsible for sharp vision loss, and it's needed for detailed tasks. So the degeneration of the macula is what's associated with Stargardt's disease, and it makes it very difficult to navigate in low light. And most cases of Stargardt's are caused by mutations in only 2 genes. So very different to RP, where there's hundreds of genes associated. We only know about a couple of genes that cause Stargardt's, but the genes that cause Stargardt's are super, super complicated genes, very, very large genes, and hard to test. So the main gene, I guess, that we find related to Stargardt's is the ABCA4 gene, and it codes for a protein that's job is to transport toxic substances out of the cells in the retina. So we all accumulate the toxins in our retina when light comes into our eyes and then is transmitted into electrical signals to go to our brain. An offshoot of that process is we accumulate toxins in our retina. And when our ABCA4 gene is working properly, its job is to remove those toxins from the retina so they don't build up. So if someone has a change or a mistake in their ABCA4 gene that makes it not work properly, those toxins build up, and that's what causes the cells to die, and that's what causes the typical vision loss that we see with Stargardt's disease. Stargardt's disease is caused by, is autosomal recessive, so you need to have both copies of your ABCA4 gene not working or spelling mistakes on both copies to have the condition. So to start, the ABCA4 gene, so far, and this is probably wrong as of me writing it, but we know of about 1,400 mutations in the ABCA4 gene. So it's evolving daily. We're finding more and more and more of these gene faults in the ABCA4 gene that are associated with Stargardt's. And even after you sequence the whole of that gene from beginning to end, there's still a good percentage of people who have a clinical diagnosis of Stargardt's that don't have the 2 mutations that we're looking for. So they'll only have one, or they might have none. So it just goes to show that there's a lot about Stargardt's that we don't understand yet. And often when we're doing this type of genetic testing, it means that the results sometimes are not really helpful for the individual because they don't tell us the whole picture. And what we don't know is if we're missing something, or if we're looking in the wrong spot, or is what we've found related to the condition that that person has, or is it just a furphy that we've picked up? So although there's only sort of the 2 genes for Stargardt's, the genetic testing part is still really complicated for that particular condition. We also know from just testing the general population that probably about 1 in 20 people carry one Stargardt's mutation on their ABCA4 gene. So lots and lots of people are what we call healthy carriers of Stargardt's, which makes the condition probably a lot more common than we actually know. And it's probably underdiagnosed in general. Not all combinations of the gene faults that we find in Stargardt's disease lead to the clinical picture of Stargardt's. So sometimes we can find more than 1 mutation in one person, but them not have Stargardt's. So I guess just in general, everyone is still learning about the genetics of Stargardt's disease. And although we have some information, and when we do a genetic test, it might help clarify things a little bit further for the individual, there's still a lot more to do in that area. And it just keeps growing. So it's changing daily, the information that we have. So because Stargardt's disease is recessive, if we talk about genetic testing, often if someone is found to have Stargardt's and we find, everything goes according to plan and we find 2 pathogenic mutations in that person in the ABCA4 gene, it usually means that they've inherited one from their mum and one from their dad. So their mum and dad are healthy carriers of Stargardt's, they don't have the condition, but when they made that baby, it inherited both faulty copies, one from each parent, and therefore has gone on to develop Stargardt. So for that individual who has the 2 mutations, when they go to have children, they'll only ever pass on one or the other. So their children will either inherit, all their children will be healthy carriers of that particular gene fault, either from one or the other. However, they won't have Stargardt's unless that person's partner is also a carrier of Stargardt's disease. So for an individual with Stargardt's disease, it's important when they're planning their family that their partner has carrier screening for Stargardt's. But in terms of what I was talking about before with how common Stargardt's disease is and how we don't know the whole picture, having a carrier screen of the ABCA4 gene can be helpful and can, I guess, if it comes back with nothing, can reduce the chances of having a child with Stargardt's, but we never say never because we don't know the whole picture yet. Genetic Services of WA can offer genetic testing for people with Stargardt's disease, but it's a complicated process and it's sometimes done through our lab and sometimes not. We don't offer the carrier screening for partners, but those kind of things can be offered privately, and people like Karen can organise Stargardt's testing a lot quicker and a lot easier and screen partners at the same time. It's usually a long, drawn-out process through Genetic Services of WA, but there are options for people to have that screening done quick and easy through the private section. Okay, so I think that covers off everything I wanted to talk about in terms of the two conditions. I think we can sort of throw to questions and see what people have to ask.
Lovely.
Yeah.
And I do actually have a microphone
Okay.
that we were hoping to
Pass
use.
around.
Marnie, thank you. That was really clear. Go away, seat. Or you ladies can take a seat if you prefer, or come back up. I'm just going to make sure this works, and we'll pass this around. And with anyone online that would like to ask a question, please feel free, either through chat or
Yeah, I can.
either through chat or unmute yourselves. If you just want to put your hand up for me, I think that was really fascinating. I need to go and mute that person. There we go. Really fascinating to hear. There is now so many options with uncovering the genetics of your eye condition, and there are so many more pathways now to do that. I just think that's amazing, and I'm sure everyone who's logged in today have some sort of an interest in that. Did anyone from the room have any queries for either Karen or Marnie while they're here at all? Yeah, go right ahead. Oh, this is working. No, you've got a good voice.
My youngest son has managed to get his housemate pregnant.
You're not going to ask how that happened.
I was thinking through the window. He's definitely a carrier. Because I've got it. We don't know if she is. But is there a cost to go along and get her screened?
So you're talking about Stargardt?
Yeah.
And have you had genetic testing yourself?
Yes.
You have?
Yeah.
And so they did identify 2 mutations in you?
I'm with Fred Chen on his
yep.
research. And,
Okay, yep.
Yeah, they took a chunk of skin as well, so
Okay.
definitely got them both.
And your son's had a genetic test? Not yet?
No. No, that based on what you said and what Fred said ages ago, all of my kids will be carriers.
Yeah. Yeah. Obligate carriers, yeah. Do you want to talk about that, Karen? Because I guess it's more the partner being screened.
Yes, because we know your son is an obligate carrier. It's always good to confirm that on genetic testing. However, there's a few pitfalls with that from a genetic perspective, but that would be the first step. But also it depends on whether they want to know. And we can do private testing for the partner. It's a little different than genetic testing when we know we're looking for something that's got to be there. So for your son, we'd expect to find it. We know exactly where to look in the book to find the same change that's been inherited from yourself. Whereas the partner, we would be screening across the genes, the 2 genes for Stargardt's, looking for that gene change, and it would reduce their combined risk of having a child with the condition if we didn't find anything. The cost involved would be a consult cost plus a genetic testing cost for the carrier screening. What I would do is look at the best options and what's out there. But generally, most testing is costing, and it's considerably cheaper than it used to be. It's costing about $350 for the test. And sometimes that can include just what we're looking for, the specific condition, or it can be on a wider panel as part of a reproductive carrier screening panel. And that's my job, is to look at what is the best options and guided by the couple if they do wish to know. And talk through what would be their feelings if we did find the partner is a carrier. Okay, so we do. Yeah, and in pregnancy testing has a whole different emotional component to it. And time is important if there is a decision that's wanting to be made. My feeling is most people have genetic testing in pregnancy for reassurance. Okay, so part of our role is also to talk about that's great. We love to provide reassurance. However, what happens if we can't provide that reassurance, or we provide quite the opposite and confirm that there is, in this case, a 1 in 4 chance, if the partner is also a carrier, of their unborn child having the condition. But also there's variation in even the little changes that we find as to the outcome of that condition. It may not be exactly the same as what's in the family. And so there's quite a bit to talk through. Does that answer your question? But it is available. And when I started this work, it wasn't available. It was just purely looking at the family history and hypothetical risk and numbers. And we would give you a risk figure of 1 in something chance of it occurring. Now we can get down to actually, with genetic testing, if we don't find anything, that risk is still a 1 in something. We never have a 0 as Money said, but it's greatly reduced and it's a much more refined risk.
And I guess from my perspective, the beautiful thing about, knowing it, having insight yourself into what Stargardt looks like and how it displays, and as a parent being able to almost look out for some of those early symptoms and really understand the child. That's so helpful, I think, not to miss. I'm sure everyone's had those experiences growing up where they were just regarded as clumsy or something, and you're not. It's because there's an eye condition there, and so I think that is a real benefit.
It is, and it's a really important part of this is actually, that information is about preparation and about awareness and access to treatments, and that rather than waiting not sure, and this goes across a lot of genetic conditions where parents just want to know. They want to know, and they don't want to be wondering, as they may have experienced themselves when they were born. So,
such a good question.
Yeah, before genetic, you guys existed, we just went to Lions and said, what's the chance?
Yeah.
They said, well, both my parents were from Dublin and the melting pot wasn't as mobile. But they said the chance of the ex being from Australian and Dutch descent, he said you've got a better chance of winning the lotto, it's probably 5% chance. No, they're all fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, now I thought if you've got specific testing and if they wanted to do it.
And I wonder too, whether then it provides you with a team around you. So then you're not feeling so alone in it all.
I don't think we're crazy about the 700 bucks.
No. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And with some of those sponsored options, I think that are now coming out, what Karen was suggesting or presenting in the first part of her presentation really was exciting to me. I guess I'd really want to know a lot more about that, definitely.
Yeah. Sometimes the testing, although it may be like $350 for the individual, it may not always be that again for the second party.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll do them together.
They do them together. And
wow.
Yeah.
Does Medicare cover anything?
Not through the private system at this stage, and but there are different ways. It's just not unless it's through the public system.
Yeah.
Then that's access through Medicare.
If your son, if he wanted to confirm his result, he could come through GSW. They could come through GSWA as a couple, and we could see them and talk about their risks as a couple and do his testing, and that would all be covered. There'd be no charge with any of that. If they then decided to go on and test the partner, that's where the cost would come in. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think what will be interesting to see is whether we know NDIS won't cover what Medicare covers, but Medicare doesn't cover, you know, the partner genetic counselling, and you probably couldn't get away with the testing, but the counselling component would be really, you know, I think there could be a definite, well, I think there could be a plausible argument there with NDIS potentially covering some of the counselling for, and it would be, What else do we have for questions, guys?
Then had a hand up.
Got access to the chat. They were just saying no access to the chat.
No, I think
They've left. I feel like someone had their hand up on here. Yeah, someone had a hand up. I'm trying to see.
The hand up is me. Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Is that it? I have
Macular degeneration, RP, and mitochondrial disease. What came first?
Oh, what a great question. That's a scientific question.
Hard to know.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting one. And I would sort of be suggesting if you haven't been seen by genetic services, that would be a really good starting point.
And perhaps identifying the genetic cause might help explain how that happened and whether they're linked or whether they're separate.
I think RP would have been first because when I was diagnosed in 1982, which you know about 1980, apparently there were only 4 people on perfect health.
Yeah.
Who they knew of.
Yeah.
Yeah. And RP was definitely around then.
Yeah.
So, the RP was more prevalent in 80, I'm pretty sure it was. We had it, put it that way.
Something else on the chat.
Further down. I've been told I am missing NT4243.
How long was that through genetic testing at genetic services?
Yeah, if you unmute, yourself, we could probably.
Or 34. Philippa Lamont.
Through Philippa Lamont.
That being the mitochondrial.
Yeah.
That might be associated with the mitochondrial disease that you have rather than the RP. Because, Philippa Lamont can do genetic testing for those types of conditions.
And she's generally doing more often neurodegenerative conditions, not ocular, but some of these things do cross over. And usually Philippa refers on to genetic services.
Yeah. And it'd be interesting, I mean, you might, related to your RP, you might be able to access some further genetic testing for the RP genes, and there might be a different genetic cause for the RP than there is for the mitochondrial disease, which you could access through genetic services.
You're going to have an influx.
Yeah.
Technical.
Yep.
Is there any working gene therapy to correct some of these gene mutations as potential treatments in either of these two conditions?
There is. So in terms of gene therapy, the ocular field is probably the most advanced in terms of gene therapy. And there are many, many trials happening at the moment for gene therapy for a lot of the genes involved with RP in particular, and a lot of studies looking into some of the other ocular conditions as well. There are definitely options for, so it's gene dependent. So depending on what gene that you were discovered to have the change in related to your condition, is whether or not you can access gene therapy at the moment. So there are particular genes that they're using medication or therapy for to try and slow the progression of the retinitis pigmentosa. But that's expanding rapidly. So they're trialling more and more of these similar type therapies on different genes. And it's very optimistic and hopeful for the future for people with these diagnoses that there will be therapies available as time goes on to try and not cure the condition, but very much slow the progression of the disease.
Yeah, this is what the sponsored programs are about, and looking into that and researching this. From what I understand, not in the thick of it, but there's been some very good advances and very good results. But the gene testing is the part of the process to identify the gene, to then enable study participation and access to the research side of the therapy.
Yeah, so there's probably only a very small amount of genes where it's available now, but more and more we're hopeful will be available as time goes on.
And Genetic Services has really partnered, I think, with Professor Chen in particular. I think it's really connected between Lions and Genetic Services to do a lot of that testing for his patients. So it's quite amazing to hear there's research and going on from that perspective. I mean, what a great question. What else
I think Helen just wants to know,
Is it worth going through us or Genetic Services?
in that case, I would say Genetic Services very much. We're talking
Diagnostic.
Diagnostic and multiple different aspects to that.
Yeah, and your GP or Philippa Lamont or any of your doctors could refer you to Genetic Services for that discussion. Yep.
What is?
So
It's a scary question.
I might just repeat that question. So it was what is the wait list?
So the wait list to see a clinical geneticist is quite long. So we're talking sort of 6 to 8 months. The sponsored genetic testing that's happening for RP through Genetic Services of WA, I'm doing at the moment. So as a genetic counsellor, my wait list is much shorter, like a couple of months.
Nice.
And then what we're doing is I'm doing that initial appointment, and because the testing's being done through Blueprint, it's quick. It comes back very quickly rather than doing it through our lab, which takes a very long time. And then we have an appointment with the geneticist with the results, because they can be complicated. Yeah, so you just need a referral from a doctor. So most of our referrals come through the central referral service now, which your GP or they would know how to send that through. And yeah, you just need to put on the referral your diagnosis and that you're interested in genetic testing, and then you get allocated to a counsellor who then contacts you and gets all the information they need, and then puts you on the wait list so you can get an appointment in a couple of months.
Yeah, mine has really opened it up at Genetic Services by taking this on. Otherwise, it's a long wait for the geneticist.
Mm-hmm.
Does your nationality affect the prevalence?
Stargardt. I do know RP only because this morning it popped up in a result, and it was interesting. The Sephardic Jewish population has about a 1 in 40 chance of recessive RP, as opposed to the general population, pan-ethnic, of less than 1%. So often different ethnic groups do have different frequencies of carrier conditions, but Stargardt, I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult to quantify at the moment because we're actually finding out that a lot more people are carriers of Stargardts than we ever knew. So in terms of isolating like which groups particular mutations belong to, I don't think we're there yet.
I had heard there was a prevalence in, was it the Irish cohort?
Yeah, the Irish cohort is an interesting group for many recessive genetic conditions, and I think you mentioned as well, we touched on earlier, sort of consanguinity or intermarriage can increase the chances of recessive conditions. But in the Irish population, it's not that they've intermarried, it's just a smaller community, and therefore the gene pool is more shared. And I've actually started asking Irish, well, a couple I saw recently, not to do with ocular conditions, said, no, we're not related, but actually our families grew up and we all lived in the same street. We actually married our neighbours, and therefore your gene pool is smaller, and therefore recessive conditions become more frequent.
Yeah.
What other questions do we have? Great opportunity to ask. Yeah.
Is it something that would be screened for if you had a couple coming in who, for example, didn't have any family history and they just wanted to know whether they had or were carrying any genetic conditions that could be passed to any offspring as part of family planning before they decided to start a family?
Yes. So reproductive carrier screening is what you're talking about when a couple wants to sort of be screened as a couple to see their risk of being carriers of the same thing and potentially having an affected child. So at the moment, that's not offered publicly through the public system, and if people want to access that kind of screening, it's at their own cost privately.
Okay.
And their doctors can organise that for them, or they can have it done through private genetic services. It depends. So with reproductive carrier screening, you can screen for as much or as little as you want. So you've got your really common recessive conditions like cystic fibrosis and Fragile X and SMA that you can kind of just screen for the most common ones, or you can screen for panels of hundreds and hundreds of genetic conditions that are recessive. And a lot of those panels do have the Stargardt genes on them. Yeah, so it's an option for people if they want it. They just have to be sure that they pick the test or the panel that has the Stargardt gene on it. So not all of them do.
And the other thing I'm curious about is where the research repository that you rely on for this testing. So are you looking at clinical studies that are being done around the world to find out where the genetic mutations are and how they happen? Are you looking at biobanks? What's your resources? What are you relying on?
So it's lab-based in terms of genes that have been tested for and discovered, and they have massive databases of information about pathogenic gene changes related to family histories and clinical individuals who've been diagnosed. And the panels are made up of genes that we know are definitely the cause of these conditions, and a lot of them are panels of genes that are associated with conditions that are not very nice, that cause quite severe disease in individuals who inherit them. So, yeah, the information's coming from databases worldwide.
And they're all interconnected. They all
Communicate.
come back to a centralised, de-identified database of variants. And so some labs, what Marnie was also talking about before, those unknown variants, uncertain variants, over time they become reclassified as more data goes in. And then those labs, not all, but some will actually update testing that was done 1 year ago, 5 years ago, and actually say that variant, we didn't know what it meant, is now classified as likely pathogenic. So they are the ones drawing on all the worldwide data and updating as things change. And then we're notified if that lab is notifying.
Yeah, our lab usually let us know.
Yeah.
That's great, thank you.
I think on that, can I also ask, it's Maria, so if someone has a recent diagnosis, be it RP or whatever retinal inherited eye condition they have, and I'd imagine there'd be a element of, worry or question, obviously, about what the future might hold in terms of their prognosis and the likely the likelihood that the condition may track. Will it remain stable? Will it deteriorate? How quickly? Those kind of questions. Would genetic testing, because there seems to be such a variety. Some people's Stargardts are so much, maybe, or RP might be so much more advanced at an earlier age than others. Is it worth, pursuing genetic testing and counselling to maybe explore the likelihood of that kind of questioning or conversation?
I think things are heading that way. We're just not able to yet. So the clinical picture, so the stuff Fred Chen does and the tests he does in his labs and the monitoring of the actual progression of the disease in the individual is going to give the most information about their disease progression and I guess how fast or how slow that will happen. The gene fault that we find doesn't really give us any information about how that will affect the individual clinically. So
would there be variants of like you mentioned, like
and they're so variable that even within a family, so we can find a specific gene fault that causes the RP in that person, but then if they've got a cousin or a relative that's got the same gene fault, they might be affected in a completely different way. So there's got to be other genes interacting with it, it's got to be environmental, it's got to be all these other things that come into why the picture is different.
I was saying that, though, we wouldn't just say, here's your genetic result. We've got no idea what it means, no idea how you're going to be in the exam. We do try to tease out with the combination of what's happening in your family. That informs also the interpretation of those results. How and what is the clinical data that's associated with the variants that have been reported? What is the functional component of that gene change as well? So the lab, not us, the lab will tell us that appears to be doing this to that gene function, and therefore this is potentially the likely progression of the gene. All of that is developing, and we are getting better information to guide that discussion and to acknowledge that that's a really important part of clinical and genetic diagnosis. Is people want to know, what does this mean? What is it going to mean for the next 5 years, 10 years? And some are much clearer. Some conditions and some genetic areas are really variable. And all of those genes, you imagine, we're talking one tiny little change in a gene amongst thousands, billions of bits of DNA that all interact to make who you are. It's like, even siblings are so different, but you share half your genetic makeup. And
Ben and I saw a young girl yesterday, and we've found a couple of different gene faults in her, and her progression of the disease until now is really unusual and doesn't fit with your standard kind of RP, and the genes that we've found kind of fit but don't fit. So it's this big uncertain area. So when stuff like that happens, what we're going to do is get Fred Chen on board, get him to check everything clinically. Maybe he'll see things in the eye that do fit with the genes that we've found, and just working together as a team to try and work out how this all fits together and what that might mean for her going forward in terms of her own disease. Yeah, it's a real group effort.
Oh, thank you. In our family, we're a little bit like, we've got quite a lot going on
Uh-huh.
genetically.
Yeah.
When I gave birth to my first daughter, Sam's my second daughter, she was diagnosed with 22q11.
Uh-huh.
And we were seeing, I think it was Professor Hockey at King Edward.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we did a fair bit on that side of things, but back then we couldn't even get a diagnosis because the technology just wasn't even there. So I think she was about 17 before she got diagnosed.
Okay.
And now Sam, well, we've got other things, but yeah, with Sam as well. With the testing that you guys do you look at, even though hers is not solely ocular related, but there is vision loss there as well, do you look at any interactions between the two different, disorders, and see if there is any familiarity or any connections or anything like that?
I guess, yes, we definitely will take family histories and get all of that information about all the different conditions in your family. And, if there's two different things that we need to look into, we'll test for both. If the geneticists are aware of any kind of link between those two, they will definitely talk about that and pick up on it and counsel about that. But I guess, yeah, even if they're not associated with each other, we can still talk to both and talk about reproductive risks and how they're passed on in genetic testing for sort of both avenues, for sure.
Oh, the chat. I think they've left. Oh,
Yeah, Sharon Reel just left.
Oh, just double checking.
Yep.
There's no more chat.
No.
Questions?
No.
No? Okay.
I have to say,
Someone's typing.
This has been...
Yep, someone's typing.
Oh, great. We'll just let them ask their question.
She's probably saying she's going to.
Oh, thanks so much. That was a thank you.
Oh, that's exactly words out of my mouth, whoever that was. And may we give the ladies a bit of our appreciation, I think. Just a small token from Visibility and Lynn. Firstly, from us, one for you.
Thank you.
And we've got
free drinks. Sorry.
And out of the background here, and one from Visibility and from Lynn. And just, there we go. I hope you will stay for some coffee, but we understand if you need to dash off and for the bride. Since it's wedding day, there we go. It's Saturday, you've given up your time.
Thank you.
And
Thank
there
you.
we are, ladies.
They are gorgeous. We could pretend
Honorary.
they're gorgeous. Thank you everyone for coming. It has been a real treat to meet you and to be part of this. Thank you, Maria.
and you're happy for us to share your presentation on the Stargardt Facebook page, and we'll keep in touch. And if anyone does have any post questions, please do. I think Karen has access to, anyway, we can post your questions on the Facebook page or come back to us.
Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's some water on the table there for you as well. Can I stop this recording now? Just bear with me. There we go.